Okay, so today I'm going to talk about using a positive leverage device. There's a lot of variations around the world. A lot of riggers use them. I always recommend to avoid them. When I'm teaching people to pack reserves, I tell them how to use it correctly if they must use it, but I try and get them to avoid using it. And the reason I don't like them is because once you start putting your loop in there and you start winding them up, riggers are very ham-fisted, very aggressive, and they're using this to wind up, to close the flaps together, to force the loop into position, and just by pure strength. And the amount of damage that causes is quite massive. And when I say massive, it damages the grommets, it damages the core jaw around it, it actually damages the base plate, and I've seen them completely warped at the bottom, and you don't see all that damage until the next reserve repack. I'd say about 80% of riggers who are using these don't know how to use it properly. If you are going to use one, the idea is you get the pack volume in the right place, you close the flaps up, get the grommets almost closed, and then you can use this to actually just finish it off by gently winding it up, just to finish it off to help you put the pin in. You don't use a lot of aggression with it. That's not what it's for. If you have to use a lot of aggression, your technique is wrong. Never put that against the container. That damages the grommet, that damages the actual core jaw or parapack at the same time. So always use a kneeling plate, put it on the top, and you can gently wind it up. There shouldn't be a lot of pressure here. Another version, you can use this and wind it up. I demonstrate to potential reserve packers a good technique so they can close a container up without struggling, without the need to use a positive leverage device. However, I know there's a lot being used, and if they're used correctly, you can get away without causing any damage if you know how the damage is caused in the first place. I saw a demonstration on somebody using one of these devices, and there wasn't forcing the container together. There wasn't forcing the loop into position. They just use it as a third hand. They was using a good bulk distribution technique, making sure that that just finishing off, and at any stage you can just stop, unlike a T-bar. So as you let go, it's going to unwind again. This stops, holds it in position. Really helpful tool. So I started using one of these. The first one I used, I bought, and it was really heavy duty. It was heavy at the top, so it kept wobbling around. I didn't like the handle, I didn't like the hook direction, so I thought I'd get my own and see if I can find one that's a bit more user friendly. This device, it weighs 1.5 pounds, so it's really lightweight, and what I like about it is it's low center of gravity. You're not having a big mass at the top to make it all unstable. The handle itself is really comfortable and nice to use. I like the fact the hook is pointing away from the handle, so you can have it wind up, but you've got this area to work in. This has also got a long pull-up range. It's 10 inches, so it's about 250 millimeters. So you can even start in the middle somewhere. You don't have to start low down because it's got such a long range. The specification for this is 250 kilos, which is about 500 and something pounds. And that's a lifting specification. But having done some pull tests on it, I know it pulls out to 32 pounds, and then it won't tighten up anymore. It locks out at 32 pounds. Unlike one of these devices, you can do 50, 60, 70, 80 pounds of force on the loop by using one of these. That's why I don't like them, because people are so aggressive, forcing things into shape instead of learning some good techniques. Now, this is a prototype design. Basically, I've bought a hook and bolted it on. I've printed the base down, and I'm going to fine tune this a little bit. And I'm also going to try the next size up, because I know this will pull 32 pounds for the 260 kilo version. But the 400 kilo version, I'm going to test that and see how much poundage that pulls. With 32 pounds, it's enough to pack any reserve, because you've only got a maximum load on your loop of 22 pounds. And if you're getting up to 32 pounds and your loop's not showing, it's telling you your bulk distribution is not in the right place. You haven't got the pack job right. So go back a stage, manipulate the bulk distribution, and then do it. So that is like self-policing, because you can't overload the reserve loop. So by the time you're finished, you should always be down to 22 pounds. what I've done here as well is left that wide. Unlike you've got a small little gap on here, trying to get your pin in, you've got to take it in that direction, your closing pin. I've made this wide, so actually you can get your pin in any direction depending how the loop's twisted. You could even come in this side and get your pin in quite easily. So I wanted that fairly wide. But what I've just done now is, because I've been practicing with that one on this prototype, I've actually made it longer at the front here. And the reason I made it longer is because this area now can go very close to the grommet. You've got the centre of gravity coming straight down, and you've got a better balance on it as well. So I like that open space, I like the balance, and I'm still fine tuning it. So when I get the 400 kilo version instead of this 260 kilo version, I'll test that as well. But that's the one I'm quite happy with right now. What we here is a small atom container. I've already put the first flap closed, but what I want you to take note here is along the side here and along the side here, it's curving around. The bolt there is curving around, the bolt here is curling around. So naturally it stops fairly close. Some containers look further apart, so this is not that bad to close. But what you want to do, even if you use a positive leverage in your device, is move that bolt away from here and pull it into that area. So before I even use a device to close it up, I start shaping the container, and you can do that by compressing the sides. Or winding the sides and compressing it so the flap comes over, and you knock it into shape on where you want it, so you know that you're not just winding that up to pull that in. So the bolt distribution is the most important part. But now if you use a positive leverage device, now what you do is you put a loop in here, and let's say I'm using this big one for example. I will now put that through there, put that on there, and I'll now use that as a windy device to tighten it up. So I use my kneeling plate still, but I use it with the padding down, and I start taking the pressure off the actual closure loop. But I'm not putting any force on this at all. It's very little pressure, but I am manipulating the flaps to come into place. So as you push that in, you can see now that it's taking shape. That's almost together. One grommet and the lower grommet is almost together. Very little pressure on. That is just a third hand. There's no pressure on it. I haven't held it tight. But what I do now, take the pressure off so I can feel the actual pin itself, and then I'll move the pin with the pressure off to not cause damage. If you've got a lot of tension on when you remove the pin, again, that can cause damage. So I'll pull the pin out, and now I'll use this to pull up closure loop. But what I'm doing is I'm looking at it, winding it up with just a little bit of pressure. You ease it up into place. You're not using it ham-fisted and winding it up. And you can just a little bit of maneuvering. You can see the loops appeared already. So without using it as like a positive leverage device, it's more as like a third hand. It makes it really easy then to get that pin in place, right, and close it back up again. So you're not using it to wind it up and close it up. You're using it as more like a third hand. So in those instances, it can be very useful. Right? However, to close that second flap up, you don't really need it. I could have wrapped that around there, lock that on, pull that up, manipulate it, and put the pin in just by using your hands, which is what I do 99% of the reserves I've packed. Okay, what I'm going to do now is show the use of this positive leverage device. But basically, we've got those two flaps on the sides together. We're now pulling the third flap up. So straight away, I've already shaped it so the grommet already goes over the grommet. It's not back here, and I'm not using the device to pull it up, pull it up, pull it up. You manipulate the bulk. You take the bulk away from here, push it in. You manipulate it first. So all you're using this for is like a third hand to help you close the container. When you do that, you put a little loop in. I still use a kneeling plate because it's very handy to use that. It spreads the load across here and helps to balance it more. Right? But you can use that directly against the container. I put that on the actual hook. The back end of the loop I also put on, and then take away the slack. Right? And then I start winding it up just to feel the pressure. There we go. So now you've got the pressure on. You can let go of the reserve. I'm not taking it. I'm just touching that in a minute to feel that I've got the pressure off. I'm not pulling the loop through, the pin's still in. I'm just making sure the bulk is not pressurising on the sides and not pressurising on there. And I can see the grommet is going through to the previous grommet. So I'm actually using it as a third hand before I take the pin out and put it in. That's all I'm using it for. I'm not using it to force the grommets together. So using it correctly really can be helpful. So now what I'm going to do is take a bit of pressure off, and now I'm going to pull out the reserve pin itself, ready to go. So you can see, now I can do like 1, 2, got 2 pulls on that. I can let go of it. It's really easy now to get that pin, lay it in place, and close that container up again. So now I just take the finger off, close that down, that comes off, and by using that loop you just pull it, it's open again and ready to go. So as you can see, the grommet over the grommet is before you use the device, before you use a tension device. So if you need to use a tension device, use them correctly. This one is less problematic than having something like a windy tool, so it is beneficial. What I'm doing now is I'll put the last flap in place, and I've already taken the tension off here. That grommet's not exactly over there, so I will help a little bit just by putting a little bit of pressure on here as I come to the back of the container, and I push where the AED is, push it into the container. I'm shaping the volume out of the back. Straight away, you can see I've got grommet over the grommet. So you manipulate the bulk in place before you start using anything. That is the important part, and it's easy to do. Okay, let me just go back a stage, because I want to talk about how to make putting the final pin in easier by using a pull-up cord, which has been modified slightly. This is a typical cypress line, and when you put tension on here, and a lot of tension, it goes very, very thin, and it closes up around the area where you want to put your reserve pin in. But if you finger trap another piece of cypress line inside that line, it thickens that up just enough so when you put tension on this, it's thicker around there. It doesn't close up as much. It actually opens up, makes it a lot easier to put the reserve pin in. So I always use a pull-up cord with another piece of cypress line finger trapped inside. It makes the job a lot easier when you're closing it up. Okay, my camera kit is not the best to show this. I really need the camera to zoom in. But by having the pull-up cord with an extra piece of cypress line inside it, what it does, it doesn't tighten up much, it opens up just a little bit more, make it easier to put the pin in, less chance of damaging the loop, and it just helps, especially with some tight pat jobs, and most pat jobs nowadays are getting tighter and tighter. So that thickness does help to widen it that little bit to put the actual pin in. Right? So that little mod I actually like using a lot, especially when it comes to the last few flaps. Once the gap's open, you can put that in there now, push it towards the top of it, and it slides in easy, really easy. All right? It slides in easy purely because of the thickness of doubling up the cypress line on the closure loop itself, right? And you don't have to struggle and get that pin in position. It just put it towards the fat end, you push it down the bottom end, it gets tight, so you angle it to get it towards the widest end at the top, and then it just pops in very, very easily. Now, when you're removing the pull-up cord, obviously what you want to do is now ease it around the side underneath the actual loop itself, pull it around the pin and get it inside. So what I'm doing now is, as I'm sliding that through, right, what it's not doing is 9 on 9 is creating heat on the top of the loop, but I've got no tension underneath, so I can actually pull that out nice and gently, nice and slowly underneath, and it's not loaded. There's no tension on this now, and it's underneath the pin itself as you're pulling it out, as opposed to pulling it out when it's on the top. Right, there you go. Now it's just a case of open the loop, position that in place, and do your final checks. Now, at this stage you do a pull test. I'm starting to get used to this more and more. It's well designed, well built. I think that should be a bit more rounded around that edge there. But if you pull this off to one side slightly, you get that curve into the actual grommet there. You wrap that around there. Now we can go ahead and do a pull test. I wanted to talk about doing the pull test now. When people do a pull test, I've seen two different methods. People pull it straight down and people pull it 90 degrees angle to the housing itself. I actually like pulling 90 degrees to the housing because that's the worst case scenario, and you know that will be the maximum realistic pull force. Everyone says, but your reserve drills are you punch down anyway, but actually when you're horizontal, when you put a skydiver horizontal, if they practice everything pulling down on the ground, even when you put them horizontal, they pull down. I've seen it in realistically. So actually, they actually still pull it that way because they're facing the earth now. The ground training doesn't always equate to what they do in the air. It's best to put the harness on, so you've got this over your shoulders and you can do the pull test and watch it at the same time. So look at the actual loop itself. Put the loop on. It's 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15, and as I'm pushing now, 19 pounds, I can see it's pulled the actual pin. I felt it move the pin, so it's 19 pounds. Right? You can get scales where it actually stops at 19 to make it easier, or you can rotate it here. But for me, pulling that in that direction, 19 pounds of pull force, I know it's pulled the pin, it's already moved it, so I know that is the maximum pressure, and that's what I'll put on the document, 19 pounds of pull force. It's worth noting, there are some skydivers out there, I've met a couple in my career, they can't pull 19 pounds, literally. So you've got to make sure it's the user themselves can pull the reserve. So if I get someone I'm not sure can do the pull the reserve parachute, I actually get them to do it manually. So as you can see, what's happened, right? That's moved against the housing, that's pulled out, but you haven't popped the pin. So what you've got to do now is slide that back in, release that, and move that out of position. The concern I have with this is sometimes I think that edge there could actually damage the edge of the grommet. It never has done, I've inspected a lot now, but to me, if that was a bit rounder, it would be a better design for sure, so you can't damage anything. So it's a 19 pound pull force, and when I was pulling this up, it deadened out and it wouldn't pull it anymore. So I reckon this pull force went up to about 22 pounds, so you can't pack a reserve over pressure on this little device. That's actually quite a good key selling point to me. Unlike, there's no limit on this at 22 pounds. People can wind this up to 40, 50, 60, 70 pounds. It's ridiculous the amount of damage they can cause to it. So if you're going to use a positive leverage device, one of these is definitely beneficial. It's almost calibrated for the job. Packing reserves parachutes is all about learning the best techniques to get the job done, to make it easy and comfortable for yourself as well. Here's another method you can use to actually close the flap up. What I've said previously is obviously you can feel all the bulk around the side here, down the back and down here. You batter those in and you close these flaps together. This method, you can see I've already got the pin in place with the grommet over the centre of the pilot chute. So you can actually use this one to come onto the side here. And now you can actually use the cleavage device to pull this up. And what it's doing is actually that part of the closed loop is not changing. So you're not damaging the loop at all, but you're actually pulling this over, getting it into shape, all ready to get to that close area. Just a little bit. This is quite packed off. And then obviously you want to manipulate this as well. Push it in. Really push it in. One way of doing this is you can put it on the side, over on the top, and you're squashing the two sides in, moving these two flaps together, really quashing them in just to make that centerpiece easier to close up. And this type of closing device really helps with that, because now you can see that's flatter there, that's flatter there. You've moved that in, and I've pushed them in, and already I've got to the point where the grommet is already over on the top of the other grommet. A little more tweak, pull the pin out, and you can see the closed loop itself is virtually already there. So you see the tip of it there now. So another pull, one pull on the thing, and you can see the gap appearing at that point there. See how easy it is to put that pin in. Now, the thickness of this loop, as I said, is helping to open that up there now. If you look at the pin here now, you can see how thick that end is on most reserve cables. Right? It's a lot thicker than the actual pin of a packing tool. Right? So having that gap opening up at that point there really helps to get that pin in place. So let's just pop that temporary pin in there now. So that goes in place, and then you can press that button, release the pressure off. That goes down nice and easy, and you go to the next stage. Now again, it's not a matter of using a tool to close it up. Now what I'm going to do, and if you look at the next two flaps that we have to close up, you know, it's got to come around the curve and around the curve. So again, you get your hand on the back, squash the back end in, pull that flap over, really make sure that flap comes over in place first, so it's almost in place. Then again, use your actual packing tool. So you can see there, it's over top of the grommet directly already. It makes it very, very easy. So when I do the next one, I'll do the same with number 6. So here we go again. You can put that on directly. I've shown you a different method now. You don't have to use the packing plate. So I'm lining this up with the top of the grommet. So I've got a direct pull into it, and it's spreading the load just to take the load off before I pop the pin out. Pop the pin out, and then just pop the pin in place. And finally, when you go to the last flap, exactly the same method. Pull this back, squash that down, get any bulk out the way that you want. Manipulate it so the grommet is virtually already in position. As you see again. So let's do the next one. Then you make your loop, put your tool in place, put a bit of tension, put the excess loop over, and start your wind up. Again, position your grommet exactly where you want it on the actual plate. In this case here, what I'm doing now, taking the slack out until I feel, and I can see the grommet is below it, and I can feel that now has got to the point where I know it's the pin ready to be removed. Right? So move the pin out of the way, pop it open. Now, you see how this thing tapers down as well. What I used to do a lot was have the main parachute under here to help flatten it. When you're packing reserve, it always helps when it's flat. So there's a lot of tools you can use, packing tools. So even when I'm packing on the ground, what I like to do is have something underneath the container, like my packing tools, and it helps to flatten the container. Even when I'm packing on the ground and I'm kneeling on the reserve and I'm pulling it by hand, by flattening the container so the top's level, so you're not down all the time, it makes it a lot easier to work with. So using packing weights under the container when you're closing it up is another tip that makes it really easy to close. So pull it up, you can let it go, take your time, look at the loop. It's not quite above the actual grommet. Don't want to take it too far because the more you do it, the tighter it gets. So I'm looking for the gap, and you can see this time it's from this direction, but that gap is already opened up by the thing. So just by putting your fingers in there now and sliding that in, see how easy it is to pop the actual pin in place and get it ready. And again, just pop that down the side, ready for removal there. So in this particular place now, you've got your cable going through, you know that's right, you can actually go ahead and remove the actual loop itself. Now, before I show you put it on the pin, but some people just leave it around the loop underneath this way and do the removal. It's the same sort of principle. You're just sliding it through the loop with no tension, so you don't damage any part of the closed loop itself. So if you've got even the slightest bit of broken phrase here, you start again and replace the closure loop. That's got to look 100% perfect at that time. And what I've done here is I finished shaping the container. I pushed the bolt down here, I put the flaps over, the side flaps over. I've shaped it everywhere I want it to make it look like the final pack job. What I'm going to do then is do the final pull test. I've just shown you over the shoulder method. Now I'm going to show you the method I use where you put this around your leg to simulate the shoulders, and you can do the pull test by yourself on the ground. Okay, what I'm going to demonstrate now is over the knee test pull. The reason you use this method, it goes over the knee, it's like somebody is actually wearing the container. I'm doing a pull test, again 90 degrees at an angle, but it's not 100% 90 degrees unless I really pin that down there. But I'm putting my hand on the back of the container, on the reserve pin, because I want to feel that as soon as it starts to move. I'm now reading the poundage out as I'm doing the pull test, so it's 5, 7, 8, 11, 12, 13. It went to 13 pounds before it moved the pin. So 13 pound pull test, and put that back in place and push the pin back down again, and I can do the same again. What I like to do is do it a couple of times just to be sure. So there we go. I'll do it once more time. Feel the thing. So 9, 10, 11, 12 pounds, 12.4. So yeah, again, that was almost 13 pounds. So that is a 13 pound pull test. Okay, when you finish the reserve repack, check the reserve closure loop 100%. What you're looking for is there any frayed line down there at all, then you start all over again. It's got to be 100% perfect. And the reason I change the closure loop at every single reserve repack is to make sure that the customer has no problem during the next 6 months or 12 months of use, depending on where they jump. So make sure that is perfect. So this one, as you know, it worked really, really well. However, this is going to be my go-to device from now on. It's well built, it's sturdy, it's just got a bigger, wider base, and I just prefer it. A little bit more poundage. Instead of 32, you can go to 37 pounds. So this is the device I'll be using in the future. When you're putting a really thick pin in like this, if you put it in sideways like that, it's quite hard to put in. So if you twist it sideways when you put it in, it makes it just a little bit easier. And by having this open gap in here, you can even come from the side, any direction, makes it easier then. So placing it on its side like that, and then getting the gap in, and then just taking your time and then just popping that through makes it really easy to close the container up. Then obviously you want to turn it the right way, as and when you take the load off it. Right. So take the load off it, undo that, and then just twist that to the way you want it. This one is 1.6 pounds in weight. This one's actually 1.9 pounds in weight. As you can see, the footprint on the bottom is larger, so it gives it more stability at the bottom. It's only a little bit bulkier there, so I still like it. They've both got a great centre of gravity, low down, which makes it really easy. They've both got the same 250mm height, which is also very, very useful. The difference between this one is when you're winding it up as well, is you've got a button on the right hand side which is a release all the way down, but what you've also got on the left hand side is another button. You can come down in increments, so it just come down a bit at a time. It's very well built, very sturdy. As I said, I like the low centre of gravity, and that type of hook is perfect for this job.